Sounds good.
Great. So my name is Gabal Faruqi. I'm one of the pediatric cardiac imagers at Columbia. I'm really excited that you all are joining us for this kickoff webinar for PRIISM. So I'll start off with a brief introduction to PRIISM and kind of just how it came about. And then we'll move on to an exciting talk by Dr. Itchhaporia. And then Dr. Bacha is scheduled to join us. He's just running a little late in the OR, but hopefully he'll be able to join us after Dr. Itchhaporia's talk. And then we end with a moderated session during which you can ask questions. And so we would love for this to be interactive. And so you can type in questions in the Q&A, as well as if you raise your hand, we'll be able to unmute you so you can ask the question live. So let me just share my screen. Are you able to see my screen okay?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Do you see the other, right? Hold on a second. Better?
Perfect.
Okay, so PRIISM is short for Pediatric Cardiac Research Initiative and Imaging to Support Mentoring. And so, you know, why now are we kind of headed in this direction of creating this group? Well, in fall of last year, this is myself, Dr. Maranfar, and Dr. Pevandi, who some of you should recognize. So we were actually in medical school together and hadn't spoken for quite a number of years. And Dr. Pevandi and I had connected on social media. And so she reached out to me because she and Dr. Maranfar, who are based in California, were coming out to New York for an impromptu kind of dinner, and so, or a trip. And so they asked if I could join them for dinner. And so we got to catching up, and Dr. Maranfar is actually based in California and is an adult cardiologist. And by chance, Dr. Pevandi or Shab and I both had gone into pediatric cardiac imaging. And so we got to talking about kind of some of the challenges that are associated with finding mentorship within PEDS cardiac imaging while applying for grant funding. And certainly we have a number of wonderful mentors in different aspects of our career, but just finding kind of cardiac imagers who had undergone specifically kind of this research track and applying for grant funding was a bit challenging. And so after that dinner, they went back to California. At the same time, I became part of this Bristol Myers Squibb Foundation Career Development Program. And it's been great. I've been in the program since November, and they've provided just inspirational talks from different leaders in the field. The goal of the program is to increase diversity in clinical trials. And so, you know, I got to thinking, and, you know, over the next few weeks, I was trying to kind of brainstorm a bit about how could we, as not really early career faculty, but almost mid-career faculty, potentially bring our experience to benefit more junior faculty who were doing some of the same things that we were doing earlier in our career. And so I called Shab, and I, you know, got her thoughts as well about whether this might be a useful group to create, and she agreed. And so, you know, this group is really to address this underlying need of there being challenges in finding guidance within pediatric cardiac imaging when applying for grant funding, or, you know, those pathways towards applying for funding. And so the overarching goals are, we wanted to organize this kind of diverse network of mid-career faculty in all areas of PEDS cardiac imaging. And that's important, I think, because as peds cardiac imagers, I feel like sometimes the field is a bit fragmented, and there's so many of us who are multimodality imagers that it was important to bring people from all different areas of peds cardiac imaging into this group who had, an established track record of applying for funding, publishing in their area of specialty. And so we wanted to use the expertise of this core group to create a pool of experienced research mentors. Each of us knew a number of people who had really helped us when we were applying for grant funding. And so we wanted to bring that kind of group of experienced research mentors together. And so, the way I kind of picture this network is on the right, where we have junior faculty, and we're going to serve as sort of a bridge to this experienced research mentor pool that we are creating in order to facilitate this network, which would foster research and provide some grant review and feedback. We also want to focus on and increase conversations around promoting careers of underrepresented minority groups within peds cardiac imaging. And we're hoping to foster networking, mentorship, and sponsorship through this program. This is our core advisory group. We currently stand at 10. I'm really in awe of all that these colleagues have accomplished. I mean, they're all kind of leaders in their own right within their own kind of area of expertise. And again, there's multiple different areas of imaging that are represented within this core group. And so this is just to give you a sense of our website. So it's prismgroup.com. And so what it's a bit on the basic side. I was able to put this together, but it just talks about us. It kind of highlights that we're covering all areas of cardiac imaging, so including, echo, CT, MR, fetal echo, as well as 3D printing and VR, which obviously is something that I really hold close to my heart. When this is fully kind of developed, you'll be able to submit grant applications on the site, as well as apply to be an ERM or experienced research mentor. And then there's an area where you can submit questions as well. So just to briefly go over short and long-term goals. So we're completing recruitment of our ERM pool, and it's been really encouraging in terms of the response. So we already have about 35 experienced research mentors who have agreed to participate. We're working on finalizing our website and also confirming potential sources of funding to support this program. We're also reaching out to the different imaging societies, including Fetal Heart Society, who we'll be collaborating with, and we're really looking forward to working with them, as well as we've started conversations with the Society of Pediatric Echo and are hoping to collaborate with them as well. And then long-term goals include formalizing kind of a full-day symposium with talks related to all sorts of imaging research, DEI, conversations about DEI in medicine, also kind of including those conversations about mid-career challenges, which sometimes get kind of pushed to the back because early career challenges are really at the forefront of people's minds. And then focusing on wellness and work-life balance as well. We're hoping once we secure some funding that we're able to offer seed grants for junior faculty to get them off the ground. And then we'd love to track progress of our program. And so we'll be tracking kind of what is the success of our junior mentees through surveys and looking at how successful funding and scholarly products are. Big events include obviously today's webinar, but we'd love if you joined us. We were able to secure an afternoon. We're really thankful at the CHOP conference in Huntington Beach this summer. And so on September 1st, we'll have an afternoon full of really great talks, which I'll just show you. We have a really nice range of speakers and topics, including kind of just talking about challenges of being a clinician and a researcher, nitty-gritty of dealing with kind of large data sets. And then each of our core advisory group members will talk a little bit about their own challenges. And then this I'm really excited about is that we're able to pull together kind of each different imaging society in order to talk about briefly what's going on within that imaging society, which would be useful to know in terms of being a clinician researcher. And then we're fortunate to have Dr. Meryl Cohen give a keynote talking about lessons that she's learned from her career as an academic congenital imager. So I'll end with that, and I'll move on to Dr. Itchhaporia. I'm really excited to introduce Dr. Itchhaporia. She's an associate professor at the UC Irvine School of Medicine. She's also the Eric and Sheila Sampson Endowed Chair and the Director of Disease Management at the Hoag Heart and Vascular Institute. And then we all know she is also the immediate past president of the American College of Cardiology, one of only 4 female ACC presidents, a true trailblazer for women in leadership and women in medicine in general. I'm so excited to hear about lessons that she's learned along the way that helped her to stay motivated in her career. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Dr. Fariki. Let me just bring up my slides. And so I thought that I would talk a little bit about the leadership journey and sort of what leadership is. Let me just make sure I can bring this forward. Okay, so obviously no disclosure. I thought we just briefly talk about what is leadership and who is a leader. Although I know that all of you are leaders, we'll talk a little bit more about that. What are the essential skills and knowledge for cardiovascular leaders? And then how to find your leadership style and sort of what the leadership journey looks like, and hopefully have a little bit of a discussion afterwards. So I know the question is, what is leadership and who is a leader? And, you know, if you look at vision boards, there's a lot of different terms that come up to what people think leadership is: responsibility, dedication, effective communication, lots of different ways to define it. So really, what is the what? The what of leadership is, it's really about setting direction. It's about influencing others and managing change. It's organizing resources. It's maintaining stability. And I would say that really it's not a position or a title. And I think that's a really important point, because I think sometimes we think leadership is just about a title, but really it's not. It's about example. It's about action. And, you know, there was a great article by Kevin Cruz in Forbes, and it said leadership is a process of social influence. And keep that in mind, social influence, influence being the operative word, which maximizes the efforts of others towards achievement of a goal. And I think that's the key. It's how do you influence and how do you achieve a goal? Now, I wanted to bring up clinical leadership because it's a little bit different, right? Most clinical leaders are appointed to management positions, and then they're expected to lead. So when we're hospital medical directors, they actually want us to manage something. But leading and managing are distinct but complementary activities. Now, they're both important for success, but it's important to separate the two functions, right? Management without leadership and leadership without management is most of the time harmful. And this is where I think we get hung up, because one of the things I hear over and over again when I was president of the college was, well, doctors tend to get into the weeds. We want to manage things. And really, for effective leadership, it's being strategic is much more important. But what we've learned throughout medical school and through what we do every day is about how to manage. So that gets down to the nitty-gritty details. But yet in leadership roles like the ACC, it's about being strategic. So think about where you are to know what role you're playing. So what's the who? Who's the leadership? So anyone with a vision who can motivate others towards accomplishing a goal is really a leader. That's the definition. And honestly, we're all leaders at some time when we work towards having sharing a motivating purpose, when we work towards progress and outcomes, when we manage group dynamics, team-based care, when we mentor. We're all leaders that way. Now, you know, it's really about influencing and not about authority. And I would say the components: you have the leader, the person, you have the followers, everybody else, the team, you have the motivation, so the action process, and then the purpose. What's the purpose? What's the task? What's the vision? So the goal. Those are the components I want you to keep in mind. And there are many types of leaders. There are transactional leadership. So, they usually have to do something, but then there's transformational leadership, somebody that develops a strategic vision. And then how do you model that vision? How do you build a commitment to that vision? So different types of leadership, and recognize that we need different types of leadership depending on what we're trying to accomplish. There are times when you need transactional leadership. There are times when you need transformational leadership. There's also servant leader. And I will tell you, having been on nominating committee at ACC, so many times I heard the word, we need a servant leader. So in roles like the ACC presidency, they look for servant leader, people that are willing to sacrifice themselves to lift up others. Remember, ACC is 56,000 members, and your job isn't to sort of elevate yourself as much as it is to sort of provide a platform for the various members that we had in the college. So I would say that the components of being a leader is to influence people, right? It's about dealing with people, managing those dynamics. And influencing some people kind of happens at different levels. Sometimes it's a pushing information to them, but sometimes it's pulling information out. So it's a push and pull. And then the most effective leaders really have, are alike in one crucial way. They have a high degree of what's called emotional intelligence. And I'm going to come back to this point. But emotional intelligence, this was the sort of big Daniel Goleman, who really wrote the seminal piece on emotional intelligence. And he even said that it's not the IQ or technical skills are irrelevant. They do matter, but they're mainly threshold capabilities. So nobody's even going to let you enter if you're not capable, if you don't have the skill set, but they're entry level requirements. But he said his research, along with other recent studies that he talks about in the book, that emotional intelligence is a sine qua non of leadership, that without it, a person with the best training in the world, somebody that's analytical, lots of smart ideas, will never be a great leader. Why? Because they lack that emotional intelligence. So I'll come back to this point. And I want to close a leadership piece of this talk to talk about the 5 levels of leadership. And Maxwell puts this triangle together. Remember, the lowest level of leadership is position. So people will follow you because they have to, because you have a position, right? The next is permission. They want to because of some relationships that you created. Permission. So the third is production results of what you have done for the organization. They follow you because you have naturally sort of done these activities and they gravitate for that. The next is people development. Those people for what you have done for them. So those people that demonstrate mentorship and all of that, that's people development. But the pinnacle is respect. It's for who you are and what you represent. And these are the sort of 5 levels of leadership. And you want to work through them with the goal that you want to get to the 5th level. And Simon Sinek said this: leadership is not about being in charge, but it's about taking care of those in your charge. And I keep bringing this up because I think that's a really important piece. So when I think about leadership, and people ask me this all the time, what was your journey like? And I always say that, from the beginning, it was never about the destination, and it was really about the journey. And I always felt that. And, I always enjoyed that piece of it. And so I think, one of the things is that there is no one journey, right? There are many different roads that we'll all travel. There are many different journeys that you can take. There are many different experiences that you have, but they're all valid. They're all equally important. And they then become really the piece of who you truly are. And so I think that's important to keep in mind. So just remember that everything that you do is part of that journey, and that sometimes the difficult roads really lead to some beautiful destinations, things that you hadn't thought about. It will happen. And, I've said this before in talks, there are no shortcuts to any place worth going. And that's true. So we all look for that, but really it's a slog, it's a journey. And all the things that you do sort of compound where you end up going. But my favorite saying is you can't really connect the dots looking forward. You can only connect them looking backwards. Now, let me give you an experience. When I moved down to Southern California, I really didn't know anybody. I didn't really have a community. I trained up in Stanford, was on faculty at UCSF. Northern California was sort of my stomping ground, lots of friends, connections, community. Really didn't have that. And I remember when I moved down there, I made a sort of mental commitment that I was going to get connected to the community. And I remember having this visual of an empty canvas behind me. I don't know why, but that was just the visual that I had. And what I remember is every time that I did something, I had this visual that there would be this dot on this canvas. And over the years, there were maybe multiple dots, but of course I couldn't see them. But I had this exact moment that I can recall. I remember it one evening, I had this visual of turning around and looking at this picture with all these dots. And what I saw was that all these dots had connected in these incredible ways that I could have never predicted early on. And that became my life, that became my journey. And those included a lot of things that I did along the way, because I was told early on that nothing is wasted, that, saying yes was a good thing. So I thought maybe I would tell you about some of the lessons I learned, sort of part of and what I would tell myself if I were to do this journey again. And I would say the first thing is learn to say yes. And I've said this before to my fellows: learn to say yes till you earn the right to say no. Now, that doesn't mean that you say yes to everything. I mean, obviously we need to know what our limitations are. We have time constraints, we have other constraints. But I think early on in the career pathway, I did learn to say yes. I said yes to a lot of things. Sometimes I said yes before I knew what I was saying yes to. And so getting involved, at the hospital committee level, early on, I got involved by becoming involved with the local chapter for the American Heart Association. And I ended up creating a reputation that asked me, finally, I got asked to be invited to be on the ACC board, the board for the California chapter. And I took all of those very seriously. And so I think getting involved makes a big difference, because you sort of get out there, your name gets out there. I was also it was really important that I was part of the community. And when I did a lot of these things for the AHA and ACC, I really got to know my community. And then when I said yes, one of the strongest pieces of advice I can do is deliver superior performance. Don't just meet expectations, exceed them, because people remember that. That becomes part of the trust they develop in you, the reputation that you develop. So I'll give you a good example. So John Warner, many of you may have heard of John Warner. He was in Texas, and I'm sure the Texas folks know him. But John Warner, interventional cardiologist, he said he was in the cath lab. Oh, and by the way, John was president of the AHA. And anyway, he was in the cath lab, and he said he was doing a case, and he had finished his MBA, but he said he got a phone call from the CEO of the hospital. Said, could you come? And he said, you get nervous when the CEO calls you. He said he finished his case and went. And they said, so John, he said, we're building a hospital, and we realized that, you've got an MBA, and we were sort of reaching out to the different medical staff to see who would be interested in being part of that journey of building a hospital. Would you be interested? And he said, yes. And they said, well, we're going to be picking several members to send in a proposal, and then we will choose one person. And so we want you to think about that and think about a proposal. And he said he went home that night, had dinner, then, sat down at his desk, and he wrote out his vision. And the next day at 6:30 in the morning, he went over to the CEO's office and he dropped it off on his desk. And who do you think got that job? John Warner. He runs a hot, system now. But anyway, the point is that he delivered, he didn't just meet expectation of doing that. He exceeded it because he did it. He put a lot of thought into it, and he did it timely. If you take on something and you don't finish it, that can harm you. I can tell you, I just came off a nominating committee, and the discussions that people talk about, did the person that you are talking about, did they deliver on their promises? Did they deliver superior performance? So say yes, do it well. Have a strong track record of performance over several years, because that becomes, as I said, a part of your reputation. And, excellence is never an accident. It's a result of high intention, sincere effort, intelligent direction, skillful execution, and the vision to see obstacles as opportunities. So really, excellence is not just doing the ordinary thing, but the extraordinarily. So I think about excellence and think about superior performance. I come back to this emotional intelligence. I mentioned this, but being boldly self-aware. And what does that mean? That means knowing what your barriers are, what your internal barriers are, what your external barriers are. It's not only the extroverted people that become leadership. Introverted people can do that too, because they recognize that they're introverted. They know what they need to continue to move. And then really learning how to handle ourselves and each other, knowing when you're going to hit a pressure point of what you say to yourself. People are going to say things that trigger you. What do you say? Take a deep breath. tune out, however you do it. All of this stuff is important. So there's personal competence, social competence. You need to work on developing those. And that can be done through 360s. Why this group that you guys have could be one that you could provide each other that feedback. And you need to have honest feedback. Are you aware of the unique impact you can make and how others perceive you? Extremely important. And really having strong self-awareness is important. Knowing your strengths, where you can make an impact, and then be brave enough to make that impact is really the key. And we all have strengths and weaknesses. We need to, and somebody said this to me very early on in my career, know what your strengths are and accentuate those and de-emphasize your weaknesses. Know them because you need to know when you need to, and when you are in situations where you feel that weakness, figure out how you're going to overcome them. So I think that's important. I think it's extremely important to have expertise. All of you do in your various fields, but continue to develop that expertise. Be a lifelong learner. You know, the pace of innovation is fast. There are new techniques, new knowledge. Keep up with it. Do journal clubs, be at meetings. Remember that non-clinical competencies matter. Professional development is extremely important. There's all kinds of things that you can do. This one is really important to building relationships. As I talk about the journey is with a group of people all the way along the way that help you build those relationships that can help you in the future. Colleagues, nurses, your team, your patients. Trust me, some of my patients have mentored me. I've literally had coffee with them and they've mentored me. And I think that they can be, and learn from their experience. Remember, team-based care is here, so all of the care team members are important. Seek out mentors. I used to think that one mentor, but now I realize that there are different mentors for different things. And then making friends. It's really important to make friends because those friends are the ones that are going to be, you know, if you have an amazing network of impressive peers, one day they'll become your network of powerful leaders. That's what you guys are embarking on. So you should do that. And then think about as you interact with these people, what is your ability to inspire them to take action? You know, what inspires you about them, and how can you inspire others, and how do you get motivated? Learn all of those things with your group dynamics. These are some of the people over the years. I take pictures because I'm so proud of all my relationships. You know, all the different places that I go to, I take pictures, and I'm really involved with my group of friends. I love to go, I exercise every day. So when I walk early in the morning, there's a picture of us in front of the White House. That's the Board of Trustees. Why? Because I said, when I go along, everybody knows that I'm going to get up and go for a walk early in the morning. So they want to come along. So we take pictures. And, you know, it's nice to go back and look, because then you start to realize all your friends that you have. And it doesn't matter internationally. That's some friends of mine from Taipei, Carol Watson there in Beacom. And these are some of the people that I've mentored, international mentees. So my mentee from China that I still stay in touch with, another mentee that's now an interventional cardiologist out of Mayo Clinic. And then also the relationship with your spouse. So this is my spouse, who is absolutely one of my strongest supporters. And I will tell you that whoever your spouse, significant other, take some time, because they can be the person that is going to be your supporter. I did this in a very, one of the things that I did with my spouse was I could see early on as I was traveling and doing things that he was starting to get a little bit maybe irritated that I was never around. So I sat down one Saturday morning and said, honey, can you pull out your calendar? And we went through a whole year's worth of calendar, and I told him everywhere that I was going. And I said to him, I need you to come with me to all of these. I want you to come with me to all of these. Now he's a gastroenterologist. He doesn't just have time to sit around and follow me around. And so I said, I recognize you may not be able to, but I'd really like for you to try. So to his credit, he came to about 80% of my events early on. Now, it helped me in two important ways. One is that he still understood my passion. He also got to know a lot of my friends that I spent a lot of time with. And it sort of decreased the angst he felt when I wasn't around. And now he chooses where he wants to come, but he's very comfortable with the things that I do because of that. I will tell you one other thing that happened, and this is particularly helpful as a woman. When early on, I remember doing a big meeting for 2 days. I was a chair. At the end of the meeting, I was sort of tired. I called him up. I said, what are you doing? And he says, I'm in the bar with all the guys. Okay. Well, all the guys had invited him because he was a guy. He was a dude. And I wasn't. And so not that they wouldn't have invited me, but it was not a natural thing. And then when I came and I sat down, they all said hello. And then about 10, 15 minutes later, he said, you know, honey, you stay. I'm tired. I'm going to go. Well, this happened a few times. Well, now I became part of the circle. So every time after a meeting, they would say, are you coming? And he sort of helped break those barriers early on. So I think your spouse can, or your significant other, if they're involved, they can be a supporter. And so that's important. I mentioned this to you early, strategic thinking. It's extremely important. Think strategically. How do you add value to whatever it is that you're doing? Whether it's your department, your organization, to your group, to your friend circle, whatever, no matter what your role is, how do you make things better? How can you add value? And when you can do that, then you're going to bring something to the table where people are going to want you to be part of it. I really think this is important, preventing burnout. I mentioned to you that there is not work-life balance. It's it's a work-life juggling. But I really think preventing burnout, so that I love what I do. And the way I do it is I continue to keep myself healthy. And so exercise is extremely important. No matter where I am, where I go, I always exercise. I bring my shoes. I go for walks. I do whatever. The walking has been great because other people participate, but I go to the gym, and everybody knows I do this, even though I have crazy California hours and I'm on the East Coast doing these things. There are times when I go to ACC, I have one friend, and every time we would try to find a spa, walk, something to sort of debrief and have some time. So figure out what that one thing is for you and work on that. This is a picture of me early on. I had gone to the Florida chapter, and I had never as a kid gone to Disneyland, and I never got Mickey ears. And I just had such a great time as an adult running around the hotel room. So my husband took a picture because I was so tickled pink by the whole experience. And so bring joy to the things that you do, because you'll remember those. I will always remember this particular Florida chapter meetings. Why? Because I ran around with my Mickey ears. Also resilience is important, and courage. I didn't know when I was going to be president that it was going to be COVID. It really wasn't what I had intended. The year wasn't what I had imagined. Everybody traveled. I didn't travel in my vice presidential year. I didn't travel in my presidential year. And I really like people. I like to be around people. And now imagine if you interact and you think that's a strength for you, but now you're not allowed to do that. But yes, you have to make an impact. How do you do that? And you learn a lot about courage, because there's a lot of difficult decisions to make. And you realize it's not the lack of, it's not the lack of fear really, but it's about how do you triumph over it? How do you conquer that fear? And how do you really, no matter how difficult the situation is, show courage? And so I recognized early on that there was going to be a new normal, and a new normal was always this turning your life upside down. And so one of the things that was really important to me as ACC president was to connect with all the membership, and how best to do that when you couldn't travel, you couldn't go to chapter meetings, you couldn't do that. And that's where Coffee with the ACC president was born. And it ended up being an incredibly powerful way to connect with so many different people. And I still hear that people miss that because there was an opportunity to interact. So in the last couple of slides, I just want to say, I think the clearest view is always the one in the rearview mirror, right? The problem is just that it's the rearview mirror. What matters the most is where you go forward. And the journey, your journey, my journey, is nothing more than a series of moments, from this moment to the next moment, the one after that. And it's what we do with each of them that really matters. And so think about what you're going to do with those moments. Remember the 5 W's of life. Who you are is what makes you special, and you can't change that. What lies ahead will always be a mystery, but let's not be afraid to, let's have the courage to explore. And when sometimes life pushes you, show courage and sort of push back. Where there are choices, make the one that you won't regret. And why things happen will never be certain. I don't know why I had the COVID year, but I'm take it in stride and move forward and just have optimism and be happy with it. And ultimately that's going to lead you to success. You need to see your goal, understand those obstacles, really create the positive mental picture, even when people are trying to get in the way. Clear that mind of self-doubt. I hear all the time, how do you deal with the imposter syndrome? And I don't think it's that you don't, the imposter syndrome, I saw a great recent tweet that talked about this. And initially it's sort of like you ask yourself, can you do this? But in the beginning, you may say, well, somebody will figure it out. But then you start to realize, I may not know what it is, but I will be able to figure this out. That's how you overcome that sort of imposter syndrome. So clear your mind of the self-doubt, because you can conquer this, and embrace that challenge, stay on track. It's hard to do that, but that requires a discipline and time management. And I didn't talk about time management, but time management is extremely crucial. And then show the world that what you can do, that you can do it. And so I'm going to stop here because I think that, I'd love to be able to hear from you and be able to answer any questions that you have. So I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody.
Thank you so much. That was a truly inspirational talk. I'm sure we're going to have some time for questions at the end. So Dr. Bacha is joining us now. Emile, are you okay to join? To talk? Okay, so I'll just introduce you. So Dr. Emile Bacha, he's the chief of the Division of Cardiac, Thoracic, and Vascular Surgery, the director of Congenital and Pediatric Cardiac Surgery, and the Ralph Salzhauer Family Professor of Surgery at New York Presbyterian Columbia University. In addition to all of these titles, he's my mentor. He's a wonderful advocate for junior faculty, and I'm delighted that he agreed to speak to us about his career path and challenges he's faced and overcome along the way. So we're looking forward to your talk.
Here we go. Thank you very much, Kabul. I'm sorry I'm late. I have a patient still on the table, so I hope you will forgive me. But thanks again for having me. Kabul introduced me. I think for purposes of this talk, and where I am in life, because this is a very personal talk, I thought a lot about it as to what I was going to talk about. And I've actually given a number of talks that are fairly in the same vein to surgeons. And I noticed that when I'm talking to surgeons, I was focusing a lot on training and really like more really surgery specific issues. And I've never had a chance to talk to non-surgeons in that field. So I hope this will be interesting. And I just want to sort of talk about myself a little bit, if you don't mind, because it's important where I came from and what my journey has been to where I am and how I deal with things in general. So I was born in Beirut, Lebanon, 1964. A normal childhood until the Lebanese Civil War began in 1975. I was 11 years old at the time. Some of you, I mean, a lot of you are probably too young to remember the Lebanese Civil War, but some of you may. It was, for me, it was sort of, it absolutely defined who I am to this very day. I don't think there's a day that goes by that is sort of in the back of my mind as not, if something brings me back to growing up during the war, because it was a very intense way of being, and of growing up. And obviously those are very important years. Between 11, I left Lebanon when I was 18 years old. So those are really formative years that, your friends, your school, all of this stuff, all the normal stuff that all of you, I assume, had, I did not have. Now, I don't want to make it sound bad because I was born in a sort of upper middle class family in Lebanon. So we weren't poor, we weren't rich, but we were well off, we were okay. But the war experiences, though, money doesn't protect you from bombs, and money doesn't protect you from being shot at. So that is so this is this is sort of, I'm putting pictures up because this is the reality. That was my reality when I was growing up there. Essentially bombed out buildings, spending 2 weeks in a cellar, under the bombs, being shot at, being arrested, being beaten by opposite militias. It was an intensely religious situation, not in terms of what belief, but politically religious. There were Christians on one side, Muslims on the other side, Palestinians, Israelis, Syrians, a lot of moving pieces. And I put this guy's picture up here because there's a picture of the Virgin Mary, and that is sort of I was Christian, and so the Christian militia was a defining sort of a group in where I was living, and we were then forced, and I put these guys up here because I was forced to go and train with them. There was no choice, and it's very similar to Nazi Germany forcing youngs to go in the army. It was very, very similar. In fact, they were copied on the Nazis, these Christian militias. And so if you didn't go, they would come to your house, they would pick you up, they would, beat you, and then you would go to training camp. So every weekend we had to show up and do these trainings and so forth. So it was again very, very different. And I would have been a different person if I hadn't gone through these experiences. Whether it's good or bad, I have no idea. I think for me it was probably good, because where I am in life is I was not a great student. I was not particularly good in sciences. You wouldn't expect me to become, you know, a pediatric heart surgeon with responsibilities. But maybe it's also what the Dipti was talking about, the emotional intelligence that is sharpened, because if you're very, very much aware of your surroundings, you don't sweat the small stuff. So again, I mean, I could talk for hours on the experiences in the war. There were some bad things. My best friend died in my presence during the war. We were 17 years old. The funny experience here, as I was researching and getting pictures, I'm looking at these pictures, and I actually know this guy. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but I actually know who that person is. This is a group of Christian militiamen. This is a sort of, again, the reality being stopped and searched and constantly. I mean, really the people who suffer the most actually are your parents, not yourself, because you're a kid. You're kind of a teenager, you're growing up, and somewhat it's exciting, somewhat you understand it's not normal. Your parents, I have no idea how my parents survived this, because, you know, I have 3 kids, and they, you know, they take an Uber and you're worried the Uber is going to crash. So this is really something more difficult. So anyways, moving on. So I finished high school in Beirut, multiple interruption, multiple, you know, immigration attempts, thinking, where am I going to go? And finally, finally, it was my father who sat down, as again school was being canceled, and militia was coming and saying, okay, now, and I said, well, I want to be in the medical side of things. He said, that's it, you got to get out of here. And then we moved. I moved to Germany. My mother, being German but having grown up in Lebanon herself, I, you know, studied hard, brushed up on my German, which wasn't very good, and went through pre-med and med school there. Then I started surgical residency in Munich. I knew I was going to be a surgeon sort of midway through med school when I was first experienced surgery. And then from Munich, I went to MGH at Boston for a 1-year position, which was truly going to be 1 year, maybe 2 years, but I did not intend to stay here. A lot of people say that. I really did not want to stay. I still love Munich. It's a great city, but the training was so much better in the U.S. that I ended up doing all the USMLE, and then came over 1 year, and then 31 years later, I'm still here. I, you know, ended up. My wife is American, and and that's the OR calling me. I'm sorry. Sorry about that.
Okay.
Hey. Hi. Yeah. Okay. Okay. So all okay? Because I'm in the middle of my talk. I'll call you back later. Okay. Yeah. If you're happy, yeah. Bye. I'm sorry about that. So,
Okay.
anyways, so my challenges, leaving, you know, surviving Lebanon, surviving mentally mostly, and physically. Physically, you don't really have a choice. You kind of, you know what to do, what not to do, but mental survival, avoid. So I give you an example. My kids always make fun of me, not make fun of me, but they find it weird that I hate fireworks. And I hate fireworks because it reminds me of gunshots and bombs and so forth. I cannot stand them. So surviving civil war was something. Then adapting to a European lifestyle, I came to Germany, and the problems the students had there were, you know, much different than the problems I was dealing with. Then immigrating to the U.S., adapting to U.S. medicine, getting the training was also difficult. The big break for me came. I finished general surgery. I wanted to do CT surgery. MGH took me back for CT surgery, and that was probably my big break. And then went from there to Boston Children's, and then stayed at Boston Children's and so forth. So what did I learn from all of this? I do think challenges can become opportunities. It's kind of trite to say maybe, but that the challenges can make you wiser. You know, it's difficult for me to discuss this, because my challenges were so different from most people's challenges. I understand immigrant challenges very well, meaning I know Kabul's parents, for example, immigrated themselves from Pakistan, and so I understand these kinds of challenges better than Kabul's challenges growing up poor and in a not a nice section of New York City. So so you kind of do what you want with it, but it does make you wiser. You don't sweat the small stuff. You really become there's much worse that can happen in life than the stuff you're dealing with on a daily basis. Doesn't mean it's not stressful, the daily routine, but and how do you juggle career and family? And I was thinking, what kind of advice can I give young uh, physicians, cardiologists? Every situation is truly different. In my case, I was very lucky in that my wife gave up her career to support. We had 3 children, and then after the third one, she stopped working because I was, in fellowship and still to this day working insane number of hours, and so there was just no way. And I understand that's not um, a situation that people. It's not an ideal situation because one is sacrificing versus another. And I know there's a lot of women physician on this talk, and it's so I just only can tell you what it is. And lately, I do think my wife, that is resentful a little bit of this. Um, but that is, we chose that actively together. It made really no sense financially or whatever for her to keep on working, and she decided to stay home and take care of the kids, which is, it's again, that's also tried to say, which is as hard, if not harder, than going to work. I think in modern medicine in the US, triple threat of teaching, research, clinical is tough. It's really almost impossible to do, and that's people have acknowledged that by changing the criteria for promotion. People don't expect you to do everything. It is really hard. You could add the quadruple threat of administration to that if you have a leadership position, and somewhere something's got to give here. And I don't have really um, good solutions for you, except organization. You have to be very well organized. You cannot be sort of disorganized, because then you have to not procrastinate, and you have to stay organized. And if you do that, you can get through most of this stuff. But it is very I don't think it's easy. Finding a mentor in the early years, I think, is really important. It helped me a lot because you basically copy that person. In surgery, you copy the way that person operates. In my case, it was Richard Jonas. Some of you may probably know him. He's retired now. But I basically copied, I was doing surgeries exactly the way Richard was doing. He kind of took me under his wing in Boston. He was the chief at the time there. And and that was very helpful for me. And I copied not only OR techniques, but also other things, the way he was organizing his life, his professional life, and so forth. So I think that is very important if you can identify somebody. And Dipti was talking about leadership earlier, and this is really important. The more I age, the more I see the importance of leadership. Whether you're a boss, how important that is, and whether you are a leader, which most of you are, and even if you don't think you are actually, just by virtue of being a pediatric cardiologist with the imaging specialty. You are a leader. You are leading a whole bunch of people, whether you want it or know it or not. And the importance of being a good leader with emotional intelligence is really key. And if it's something you have to discuss, it's something you have to able to master, and you have to even down to the fact of rehearsing what you can say. How do you, for example, how do you criticize somebody? It's really hard to criticize somebody these days. I mean, everybody expects to be, not criticized and said you're doing a good job, but sometimes you have to criticize people, and it's an art to know how to criticize people without offending them, again, especially these days, to criticize someone. Yet you have to do it. As if you're a good leader, you have to be able to say, you know, I didn't really like this, or I, you know, depending on the situation. So those are all things that one has to learn. And finally, I think ethics, staying ethical is really important. In our field, in cardiology, cardiac surgery, and I see that actually more in the adult world and less in the pediatric world. In the pediatric world, I feel that we do put the patient at the center of our decision making. In the adult world, and since I run the adult cardiac surgery at Columbia, I see that there's maybe less of an emphasis of that on that. There's more of I have a stent and I'm going to do stent. I have a scalpel, I'm going to use a scalpel. And I think in the end, you really have to think about the patient and do what's right. Thank you very much. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much. I think having both you and Dipti speak really highlights kind of, despite everyone being from a little bit different of an area of specialty, how your lessons and what you spoke about are really inspiring for all of us in general. So I'll let Shab and Laura kind of take the lead. We have a few minutes for questions. So just to the audience, if you have any questions, please type it into the Q&A or the chat. So I'll just,
Yes, thank you. And thank you so much, Dr. Bacha and Dr. Itchhaporia. These were phenomenal talks, very singular talks. I don't think I've heard talks like these before. I really enjoyed them. And you said a lot of things, both of you said things that were resonating with me, different phrases, like how leadership is managing change and organizing resources. And Dr. Bacha, your points about, you know, being generous and appropriate with criticism when you're a leader, these are important points. These are things we all think about. So I really enjoyed your talk. While people are kind of assembling their thoughts and writing in questions, I guess I would ask you both, since we're all imagers and presumably some level of academic imagers on this call, that's the one thing that brings us all together. My question to you two would be, how would you design, like looking back and connecting the dots in the rearview mirror, how would you design an optimal academic career path? I.e., you know, what choices do you make when? When would you say no to these things, yes to these things? And I know you got into this a little bit, Dipti. And mainly, how do you balance gaining expertise in like a subspecialty, like getting really good at imaging early in your career, but also launching an academic career? Because we all know that's something that's important to do early on. Like, how would you do an ideal academic career path?
I think it goes back to, you first have to really say what your values are. Say, this is what your values are, and then sort of say, what is it that you really want to accomplish? What's your goal? And I think those things will help you, because then you align your activity and your efforts to whatever the goal is. And you start to do activities that will lead you towards that, because it does require a certain amount of focus. And I think early on, what is hard is that sometimes people don't know what that is. And so if that's the time that you want to look around and say yes to things, and then something may resonate with you, then you start doing that body of work, start getting to know the people. Everybody thinks it's about networking, but you can't. The networking is the how, but till you know what it is that you want to know, where do you even begin to do the networking? Because then it's just futile activity. It's a lot of waste of time. Take that time and energy to sort of come up with your own basic strategic plan, figure out, maybe set 3 goals for yourself and say, these are the things that I'm going to do. And then come up with strategic, priorities underneath each of those goals. Say maybe take 2 goals or 3 goals. 1 could be a personal goal, 2 could be professional goals, or you could have 1 personal professional goal, and just sort of say, what are some of the activities that you need to do that? And be intentional in that pursuit. And that's going to require a certain amount of saying yes to doing things, but then recognizing when you can't do it so that you don't promise. And, you always want to over deliver rather than under deliver whatever you promised on. And so that would be one of the things that I would say. I think the hardest part is to sort of know what it is that you want to focus on. I mean, I was an interventionalist. Everybody that I worked with runs cath labs and runs programs now. And initially I thought, wow, I'm probably the least successful of all of that group of people. but I sort of took a different pathway doing that. And although I still did interventional cardiology and I embraced new things, I do robotic PCI, things like that. I knew that early on my focus was going to be wanting to do these things, particularly for the ACC, because a lot of that activity resonated with me. So when there was structural work, I said no to it. Why? Because it wasn't going to be part of what I needed to do. So I don't want to hog up the time. I'd love to hear Dr. Bacha's thoughts about it too.
Yeah, thank you. I think Dipti, in her talk, you were talking about how to say yes, but also you have to learn to say no, maybe later on, but even earlier on. And my point is, for how to fashion an early career, I think actually Kabul did the right way, which is you have to ideally pick a topic and stick with it. So you want to be known for something, 3D echo, you know, something, you know, it doesn't have to be tiny slice of things, but you don't, if you stay too diffuse in your research life, it's going to be very hard to break through. So you want to be known for something. You can switch later on, but you can sort of emerge with one main topic. At the beginning of, you know, during training and then early on, you end up working on typically several small projects, but the small projects often don't pay. I mean, you end up with a small publication in a third-rate journal. Not sure that's really ideal. So again, you want to, I think, probably focus. I see a lot of young faculty being diffuse in what they do. And then there was a question about how to identify a good mentor. And you know, I mean, obviously the person has to resonate with you. You have to sort of look up to them. I mean, when I went from, you know, when I decided to become a pediatric heart surgeon, there were 4 pediatric heart surgeons at Boston Children's at the time: Richard Jonas, Pedro Del Nido, John Meyer, and then Aldo Castañeda would come and go. And I think these are names that probably most of you know who I'm talking about. And in the end, I ended up, I mean, Aldo was Richard, the very sort of cold personality. So and that's not who I am. So I really liked the way he operated. So I was copying him in terms of operating, in terms of organization, but everything else I copied Aldo. Because Aldo was much more warm-hearted and came to your office. He was like the god for everybody, and I was nobody. And he came to my office. He would sit down and he would chat and say, "How's your day going?" And wow, how does he even know who I am? And so that I thought was very, very powerful. And so you have to find somebody like that you resonate. It doesn't have to be one person. It could be more.
Thank you. Those are really good tips. And I'm wondering if we can open that up to some of the other panelists, some of the mid-career folks on this panel. How do we identify a good mentor, and what do we look for in a mentor? You know, in that, I guess mentorship comes in many different ways. There's research mentorship, clinical mentorship, peer mentorship, all sorts of different mentors in our lives. So would love to hear from others on the panel. How do you find a good mentor, and what aspects of mentorship are important?
Well, I think I can comment. And Shab and Emile, I think you both hit it. A major thing on the head right there is that having multiple mentors. I think when we were going through training, there was this thing that you're going to find the perfect person to model. And, you know, I've yet to find that. There's people who are amazingly good at getting things done. There's people that are amazingly empathetic. There are people who are amazingly productive. And I think figuring out what you need to improve and finding a mentor that can really help guide you through that. And there might be multiple mentors, and not trying to find this one perfect person to model after. And I think you guys both mentioned that. I think that's super important. And I think for finding a mentor, I'm curious what other people find, but I really struggled. And I think going outside the box, you know, my closest mentor is an adult geneticist, and she just really cared about my future and turned into a sponsor. And I just struggled for so many years, and sort of thinking outside the box. Is there someone outside my realm who might have faced the same struggles, but maybe not is a pediatric cardiac imager? You know, is there someone else who might have dealt with this in other realms? At least for me, has been, now I have multiple mentors sort of outside cardiology, has been really helpful.
I think I would just add, I think the finding can be hard. I think I did a lot of shopping. I did a lot of trial and error in the beginning, but it's also really nice to have organized things like this to kind of help match you up with potential mentors. So I think I was lucky as early faculty in Utah, they had a program called the Pediatric Clinical and Translational Scholars Program. And so you kind of had matched up with some mentors. They would match you up with mentors right away there. And so that was kind of a natural matchup. And then you would see whether they resonated with you or not. So I think finding those programs are great too. So doing some personal shopping, but then also trying to find things like this that help match you up. And then the other thing that I would, other piece of advice I would give is, a lot of us tend to gravitate towards mentors that are similar to us, or, obviously have shared, maybe outside of our field, but feel like the right fit, like kind of like our friends sometimes. It's actually, I've had a couple of mentors who our personalities are so different, but I think those relationships have been really helpful. Like they're more challenging sometimes, but I think I've learned a lot from them.
Can I make another point about mentorship? I think that it's a give and take. In other words, we always think the mentor is something we're going to get something out of it, but the mentor also gets something from the mentees. And I think that back and forth is helpful. Whenever I've had a mentor a mentee that I've really connected with, I had one early on, and I remember after a series of time, she was very disciplined about making sure we had time to meet, which I really appreciated, because sometimes people don't do that. They think the mentor is supposed to do that. She helped lead that, which was good because it meant that she was interested enough to make the effort. But I remember at one point, she said, I want to just take a few moments and review with you all the things that you've taught me so far. And we went through that list, and it was like, wow, she had really synthesized and really taken it in. And it made me want to do more for her because I felt like she was being very receptive of it. There are times when the mentees are not as receptive. So in any kind of relationship like that, I think the mentee has to also be, productive in terms of the exchange, because I think that's where the best exchange comes out.
I'll add one more thing. I did not appreciate the nuance that was present between a mentor and a sponsor. That is a very specific nuance, and I didn't recognize that earlier on in my career. And it turns out that you can have a mentor who is also then a sponsor, or a sponsor who's then not a mentor, but the two actually matter a lot. They matter a lot in your career. They matter a lot for your advancement in terms of being in a leadership position. And to, Dipti's talk, in order to get a sponsor, you have to deliver. And so I think that's something that I didn't realize in terms of sponsorship, mentorship early on.
Can I just compliment what you just said? I think the selflessness of these individuals is very important, both the sponsor and the mentor. And actually a good sponsor can be a great person to help one find a mentor, and vice versa. Thinking outside of the box, getting out of our little, subspecialties. We're so confined, it's such a small community, but getting out, as Shane mentioned, you can find mentors in other disciplines, or like Nalangi said, or adult medicine within the same institution, or even in another institution. But I think that selflessness that characterizes great mentors is really important. And I think Emile alluded to this. You want to find a mentor that you want to be like that person. You want to copy that person, in particular when you will see yourself becoming a mentor in a couple of years. So this is the person I want to become. That is the role model. And of course, there are many other things like, being available, being organized, being honest, but really having no conflict of interest in terms of scientific interest or personal or career development interest. So those are, I think, the things you have to look for in a mentor. I think maybe one of the few things that I did right in my life was that I found excellent mentors, and that has made a whole difference in my career.
I just want to add one, I know we're running out of time, but I want to add, with mentorship, I always thought it was someone that was senior to me, that was, which obviously it is, but I underestimated the importance of peer mentorship and how important it is. I mean, hence, like all of these people on this call, I consider peer mentors that really, we sort of help each other understand is this pathway, does it seem right? Did I do this correctly? And just being in the trenches together is so valuable and so important. So I think as part of that mentorship team, having peer mentors to help, and it doesn't have to be within your institution. It could be anybody outside of your institution, outside of your field of cardiology, that really can help you get through the different phases of your career.
Absolutely. And I also have to add that some of the best mentors will mentor you like without an end, foreseeable end in sight, which I feel like some of my mentors, I feel like, is it okay if I still call you? But they seem to be willing, and they're now mentoring me to be a mentor, which is like a whole different ball of wax, and I love it. I think we had another question. I don't know if we have time for one more question, Kamal. We're a little.
We're almost out of time, but sure, we can just have that as the last question, and then everyone stay on because I need a screenshot of everyone.
So it looks like, and I don't know if Emile, if you have any thoughts on someone early in first few years of training in terms of balancing clinical skills and research. And I think we kind of got to this a little bit. It feels like an immense challenge to develop clinical excellence and also pursue research. So any advice you would give people at that stage?
You know, I'm going to take a shot at this. There's no magic bullet because we would have said it already. We've been talking for an hour about exactly that challenge. It's a big challenge. And Dipti mentioned a lot of things. I think it's kind of the stuff that, you know, I tell my kids, like put one foot after another. How do you climb a mountain? You don't jump over it. You walk one step after another. It just is, you have to be strategic also. The word also was used by Dipti about, you know, what time you allocate to what kind of research you do. I mean, some research is crazy. Like some research, you know, when you're looking at a project, it's going to take 50 years to accomplish. No way you're going to be able to do that. So you have to be strategic. You have to think about it. You can't neglect the clinical side because you don't want to be a great researcher and a bad clinician. I mean, I think that's just kind of like not who anybody wants to be. So.
Yeah, and I think early on, clinical skill setting is super important because you're coming into your own. You need to be known as a good clinician. I think it helps you to become a better researcher, to ask those pertinent questions. So that's a time investment, and until you, and that may not take a really long time, but certainly to be independent in terms of a clinician, to have confidence enough that the patients, that you understand all of the clinical stuff, I think is really important before you foray. Because once you get into the research, it's going to take away time from that clinical. And I think personally, the clinical has to come first before the research. Now, unless you're really doing something spectacular in the research and you just can't stop it, I think. But I agree. I think there's no set formula. You have to figure that out with whatever the issues are surrounding what you're interested in.
I just wanted to add quickly to that. So Dr. Rob Pass, who's really my first mentor, and he's been a great source of guidance. He always used to tell me that we have to do, you know, you have to be clinically obviously great, but a lot of the research we do, especially in the beginning, is done on nights and weekends. And I understand, like, we of course have to do the work-life juggling situation, but I have to tell you that many of the people on this call and a lot of the people I know who are successful, it's just trying to, again, carve out that time, maybe after the kids are asleep or on the weekends, if you just take an hour and hopefully your spouse is supportive of that. You know, again, just talking about some of the recurrent themes of organizing and being efficient, it really ends up, you know, especially in the early stages of the career, hoping to not take away from being a good clinician, but finding time on kind of nights and weekends, unfortunately, to fit in some of the other work. So Shiraz, did you want to say anything?
Everyone's making such good points. It's hard to jump in. I will echo what people have said in terms of finding different mentors. And the one thing that I think I can add is, you know, I think many of us are at least on the panel, are now in the position where we're both have a lot of mentors and a lot of mentees. And it's sort of a skill that you get taught over time, how to be a good mentor. And I can just find myself, sort of reiterating things that my mentors have told me and practicing in a way that my mentors have practiced. And so it's sort of a neat exercise to try to figure out how you develop those practices and those sayings, because you probably gleaned them from all of your different mentors over the time. So we're sort of in a position now, those of us on this panel are in the position where we're sort of bridging that gap between people who have primarily have mentors and primarily have mentees, which is the neat thing about this group.
Great. So I think we'll wrap up. So thank you everyone for joining us. We're hoping in the next few months, really, where it's a bit of a work in progress, to have the site up and running where you can submit grant applications. If you have any other questions, feel free to reach out to us. And everyone on the panel and speakers, just give me a big smile so I can take. Thank you so much. Have a great night, everyone. Take care. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Good night, everyone.
Bye.